And it is also a privilege for me to stand here and introduce a genuine American leader, an wartime hero, and someone charged by thinking and developing a strategy for not just the Army of today, but the Army for tomorrow. You know, just a few weeks ago at the World Affairs Council in Dallas-Fort Worth, we hosted Secretary Gates, and he said that one of our greatest national security challenges is the sequestration, the cutbacks in funding, and also the somewhat understandable war fatigue and the changing dimensions of where the threats are in the United States. And so we're truly very lucky today to have someone speak with us who thinks about this 24/7. General David Perkins is a soldier whose job is to be the leader of what is called TRADOC, the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command. And that is to anticipate the future and plan for the Army to fit perfectly, effectively, and victoriously into any mission. Now, he's been described as the United States Army's newest four-star general. But as I discovered in the last few days, he is much more than an officer. He's a family man, a husband, and a father. And on the TRADOC Facebook site, there's a photograph from March 14th when he was promoted and received that fourth star. He's shown standing with his wife, Ginger, and their son, who happens to be a 2013 West Point graduate, Lieutenant Chad Perkins. And they're all waving at this image, an image of Cassandra Perkins, their daughter. So where was she? She couldn't attend the stateside ceremony because she is also a U.S. Army captain. And she was watching from Afghanistan, where she flies a Black Hawk air assault helicopter for the United States Army. So that you get the feeling that when General Perkins makes plans for the Army, he's personally planning for the protection of not just our nation, but for all of our families. Now, he's held many posts throughout his distinguished career since graduating from West Point in 1980. In 2003, he commanded the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division's Thunder Run into Baghdad. Now, in the 2004 book, Thunder Run, this raid was described as a surprise assault on Baghdad, as well as one of the most decisive battles in American combat history. His leadership in Operation Iraqi Freedom earned him the Silver Star, the nation's 3rd highest military award. General Perkins has a master's degree of science in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan, not that other state school, and a master's degree in national security and strategic studies from the Naval War College. And he's also the graduate of 2 very competitive schools, the U.S. Army Ranger School and the Airborne School. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a great World Affairs Council of America welcome to General David Perkins.
Well, thanks, folks. Appreciate it. Thank you. Well, it's a huge honor to be here today because in having a discussion here at lunchtime, I always am honored when I get to come out and speak outside the Pentagon, outside the United States Army, to you, the Board of Directors of the United States Army. You, the citizens of the United States, you are the Board of Directors of the organization I work for, the United States Army. So this is, in fact, one of the gentlemen was saying, do you ever have to sort of give reports to people about what you're doing, you know, kind of like dividend stock prices, et cetera, like that. So just consider this an update, a report from one of your employees about what's going on with regards to the Army. But more importantly, probably today, I'm going to talk about sort of the future of the Army. What TRADOC does, I'll kind of outline it so that you can kind of keep it in perspective about why it is what I'm talking about, and then maybe also precipitate some questions. TRADOC is referred to as the architect of the Army. We design the Army. So we design the future Army, kind of do the blueprints and what capabilities does it need and how do divisions work with battalions and brigades and the Joint Force and all that. But we're not only the architect of the Army, we're also the general contractor. So we're a design build firm because we design the future of the Army and then we take those blueprints and then we start building it. Now, like any contractor, the various I don't know if that means the speech is over yet. It was one of these shorter speeches I've had, but being a soldier, I can follow guidance. Okay, so this is the encore, I guess. And so then what we have to do, so we design the Army ourselves, do the blueprints, and then we hand it off to ourselves to build it. So TRADOC, Training and Doctrine Command, is a number of components. We run Recruiting Command. So we recruit the Army. So when you travel around the country and see the Armed Forces recruiting centers and the shopping malls and things like that, that's part of Training and Doctrine Command. So you can say, now I know who they work for. We own Cadet Command, which is the ROTC program, the United States Army. So we bring in the enlisted and officers. So we bring in the raw material. So I said it's like a general contractor, goes to Home Depot, gets the plywood, 2x4s, etc. So we go out and get the plywood and 2x4s of the Army. We recruit folks into the Army. And then we start building them. We send them to base. So then we own basic training. We own all of our officer education systems, all the schools. And so we send them to basic training. We send them to Ranger School or Airborne School. And we send the officers off to the infantry school or the armor school or the intelligence school or whatever. And then we send them out to the Army, to Forces Command that makes ready our Army. Then they give it to the combatant commanders who fight it. And then routinely that comes back into TRADOC. We send them to the Command General Staff College. We give them lessons learned. We give them new doctrine. We write the doctrine for our Army, make them bigger, better, brighter. Then we send them back out to be used. So what TRADOC does is we design the Army, we acquire the Army, we build the Army, and then we maintain the Army. And then what Forces Command does is make ready the Army. We give them sort of what we built. They make it ready and train it, and then they give it to the combatant commanders that fight it. So that's sort of how the Pentagon works in 30 seconds here. So TRADOC touches the Army in a lot of different places. What I'm going to focus on today is the designing the Army, and then when you take a look at what sort of the blueprint is, what does this mean for us with regards to how do we have to build it? Now, when I talk to people about the Army, one of the things that I always have to remember to discuss is one word, and that's scale. The scale of the United States Army. Because when I go around and talk to other maybe corporations or organizations that bring people in and they develop people, we're a big leader development organization, they talk to me about how they do it in a very sincere way to kind of offer insight and guidance. But I always have to bring in the scale thing. The United States Army today is 1.2 million people. We are in over 150 countries around the globe. We are a little bit of a franchise organization. Sometimes we open up a branch office in another country. Sometimes we're invited, sometimes not, depends on how that goes. So very large organization, global in scope. Our budget, which is always one of those things that we're working with our good friends here and in DC, fluctuates somewhere between $150 and $250 billion a year. So we're a multi-$100 billion operation with 1.2 million people in 150 countries of the world. Not only that, we are a fairly, relatively speaking, maybe high turnover operation because also the size of it. So when you talk a lot about designing and building the Army and then maintaining the Army, and this gets to when I talk to folks when they're bringing people into their corporation, some folks say, leader development and the human capital is such an important part of what our company does that the CEO interviews every single person that they hire in the organization. And so that shows a commitment to leader development and human capital. But then if you scale it up, the United States Army, all three components, active guard and reserve, we recruit 120,000 people every year. We bring in 10,000 people a month come into the Army. And so I said, Chief of Staff of the Army better get very busy if he's going to interview each person that we bring in the Army. So we bring in through all three cohorts about 10,000 people a month, which means we have to train about 10,000 people a month through all our training paradigm. Our Human Resources Command, what we call Permanent Changes Station, gives people a new job, moves 500 people every day, 365 days a year. They're going to be at Fort Benning, you're going to go to Germany, you're going to go to Kuwait, you're going to go here. So we have 500 people a day that already have a job, moving to a new job, and we have 10,000 people a month coming into the Army. And of course, if the Army stays the same size, that means 10,000 a month are transitioning out, and of course, which means we have to replace their jobs, et cetera. So suffice it to say, when you talk about the Army, you have to talk about scale, because that has a big impact not only on the size, but on the rate of change and volatility of what's going on. So if you want to drive change, you say, I want to change this organization to think differently, to act differently, et cetera, that is a very large task. And there's lots of different ways to do it. The first thing you have to do is you have to have a vision. What is it that I want the Army to do? What is it I want them to look like? Then I can start saying, therefore, what kind of people do I recruit? What skill sets am I looking for? And then when I bring in the Army, what does basic training look like? What does flight school look like? What does Ranger School look like? What do all these things look like? Because you have to have a sense of what you're trying to produce at the other end and what do you want to use them for. Well, guess who's in charge of coming up with that idea? TRADOC. And the way we do that is we write an operating concept. This is the big idea about what we want the Army to be able to do and how we design the Army and what capabilities. And then from that, then we have a series of processes to actually go out and build that capacity, hire people, buy weapon systems, develop training, et cetera, like that. So we write what we call an Army operating concept. And what that does really, it asks the big questions and then comes up with an answer to the big questions, which then follow on answers like that. Now I found, since I've been at TRADOC, that quite honestly, I do not lack for input for answers or suggestions. Because people come to me and they'll say, hey Dave, see, you know, the solution to the Army are pens. You just need more pens because look, you can do this, they can write upside down. When you write on them, you can pass it off to other people, you can transfer information, you can put it in your pocket. They're shiny, everyone loves shiny objects, etc. So you just need more pens. And so they come in, the next person will go, no Dave, what you really need are glasses because it's all about hydration. And in fact, even if the glass is only filled halfway up, you can always look at it as half full. So a glass by design is a sign of optimism. And so you just need more glasses in the Army. And then we go, and then the next person comes to my office with something else. So what I say is, actually, a lot of people come to me with a lot of small answers. But what the Army is charging myself and TRADOC with is asking big questions. Because I just told you, the Army is a big organization that has a lot going on in 150 countries, plus or minus, depending upon what day of the week it is. And so we've got to ask those big questions, and that's what the Army operating concept does. And so I've been there a couple of months at training. Doctrine Command, General O'Donnell, Chief Staff of the Army, said, okay, Dave, I need you to write a new Army operating concept that looks to the future. Because, you know, we've been in Iraq, we've been in Afghanistan since 9/11 and all that, and we need to be informed by that, but not captive by it. Because now we've got to start focusing on the future. We have been very consumed with the immediate. Now we have to start looking toward the future and start building that foundation because it takes a while to get there. So we started looking what we call 2025 and beyond. And so this is not what are we going to do tomorrow and what's going to happen next year and what about sequestration and all that. Because those are pretty much immediate contemporary things. What I've been charged with is look to 2025 and beyond. Look decades down the road and try to understand the environment the Army is going to operate in, and then how do we start building that? Because it is going to take a while to do that, especially if you want to make some pretty dramatic changes. And so we got to work on that, and as I tell folks, life is all about metrics. You have to have a metric to determine how am I measuring, where am I going, and how does it get there? So my previous job before this, I was out at the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth, which is part of TRADOC. One of the things they do specifically there is they write the doctrine for our Army. We are a doctrine-based organization. And shortly after I got there, General O'Donnell came out and said, Dave, I need you to update our counterinsurgency manual, our Field Manual 324, which at that time was the one famously written by General Petraeus when he had that job, when he was the commander at Leavenworth. And you're all familiar with it, New York Times bestseller list, et cetera, like that. You know, really changed the dynamic. I mean, it was a driver in changing how we approached Iraq. So that's a pretty heavy deal. I need you to take the General Petraeus manual and rewrite it. It's okay. And he said, now make sure that you talk to all the previous authors and get input and get insights of both the intellectual process they went through as well as the physical process. So I contacted him. At that time, General Petraeus was at the CIA. He came out, spent a whole day with me. We had a conference, really very gracious with his time, very insightful about how he thought about the process of counterinsurgency and the input they got. It was very useful. And really, again, a great American who wanted to continue to contribute to the intellectual body of his profession. So we worked on it for about 6 months, and I went and saw the Chief of Staff of the Army again. I said, sir, we've been working on it. We've got some ideas. Actually, I want to sort of rename the manual, restructure it, et cetera, like that. And he goes, well, Dave, did you talk to the previous authors like I told you? I go, yes, sir, I did. He goes, did you talk to all of them? I said, I'm pretty sure I did. Went around, had lunch, et cetera, like that. I said, as a matter of fact, so far, I have spoken with 100 of the 5 original authors of the manual. So I said, that is now the new metric for the one that I'm writing. If I can get at least 100 people to have claimed to have been the original author, then it will be equally as good. So life is all about metrics. You have to know how to measure what it is you're doing and have a goal. And so I said, okay, I got to write an army operating concept. I got to have a metric. And so I went around talking to people and said, well, we've got a new concept. The Army doesn't do this very often, about redesigning the Army. What do we have to do? And so I said, you know, really, when was the last time the Army even had a concept that people can remember, that drove change, that was a very focusing document and could describe the future and gave a level of visualization that could coalesce not only the Army but the nation? And it was the one that I grew up with, quite honestly, in the Cold War, and we call it air-land battle. Some of you may be familiar with that. If you have military background, it's called air-land battle. And that was the doctrine that I grew up with when I entered the Army, kind of at the height of the Cold War, and kind of took me through a big portion of my career. And everyone would say, Dave, if your concept is half as good as the air-land battle, then it will be worth reading. So I said, okay, I got it. And so that's a metric. Last time we was get 100 people who claim they wrote it. This one is, I'm going to compare it to air-land battle. So I said, let's break out a copy of our field manual 100-5 that I grew up in when I was a lieutenant captain, air-land battle, and see what it says. And let's see what the intellectual process that it drove the Army to design, really redesign itself. In fact, the question came up, this is what we did after Vietnam. When we came out of Vietnam, we said, you know, the Army coming out of Vietnam is not the Army we want. It is not going to be the Army for the future. Because we don't think we'll refight Vietnam exactly that way, the next conflict. And oh, by the way, we have other challenges. And so we came up with air-land battle. And I only have one slide. I know the Army has a well-earned but bad reputation of PowerPoint. So I am down to one, and it's pretty much just pictures. So if there are any former armor crewmen or officers out there, you should be able to understand it because it's mostly pictures, very few words. So this is a picture out of air-land battle there, and you can see it's a visualization of a formation. And again, what we do when we're designing the future of the Army, which in many ways drives the future of how we think about, from a national security point of view, what our nation does, it really does 3 things. The first thing is you have to describe the future that you think you're going to have to operate in. Now, you notice I say describe it, not predict. A lot of people want me to predict the future. Well, Dave, if you can't tell me where we're going to be, where is the Army going to be fighting 20 years from now, who's the enemy, et cetera, like that, then, you know, I'm not going to build an Army until you get to that level of prediction. Well, that's actually not the right question. I'll get back to that. But it's really to describe the future. So if you take a look at air-land battle, we started writing air-land battle in 1974, coming right out of Vietnam when they stood up Training and Doctrine Command. General Depew, the original commander, stood it up because we have to redesign the Army coming out of Vietnam. We consumed the non-commissioned officer corps. We didn't have a culture of training, and we really weren't focused on future threats. So they stood up the command that I now command today, and they said, because we have to build an Army. The Army we have is not the Army we want. We have to build the one that we need. And so they took a look at the future, and if you take a look at that picture there, which is right out of the manual, you can see it looks eerily similar to the Central Plains of Europe. Okay, air-land battle was designed, and we built an army to deal specifically with the Soviet Union. So it was to deal with a known enemy, the Soviet Union, okay, in a known part of the world, the Central Plains of Europe. That is not to deal with jungle warfare, okay. That is to deal with the Soviet Union and the Central Plains of Europe. And you say, well, then who's going to be on the coalition? It was a known coalition, NATO, a known coalition with known STANAGs, known tactics, techniques, and procedures, very well institutionalized processes to make decisions, et cetera, like that. So when I describe the environment that this document was written for, which apparently is the metric that all future ones will be graded on, it was written to deal with, and I sort of generalize it as the known. It was built to deal with the known. But that's a very important intellectual concept you have to come to grasp with, because you build armies differently depending upon the environment you think they're going to operate in. So this one was built to deal with the known. But when you go through that intellectual process, and if you're very rigorous about it, it actually becomes very clear what kind of army that you want to build. Then it was, what level of war are you going to build an army to be maximized to operate at? This one here, they specifically said early in battle is the concept of how the army arrays combat forces in time and space to the tactical and operational level of war. It specifically did not address the strategic level of war, specifically, because they said, well, really, quite honestly, we know there's 3 levels of war, tactical, operational, but we have enough on our plate. We're coming out of Vietnam. We have a lot of broken systems. We're going to eat this elephant a chunk at a time. And there was intense intellectual discussion about that. And they said, we are not going to put that in this manual. In fact, it specifically said on page 1, this is discussing the tactical and operational level of war. So it answered already 2 of the 3 big questions that a concept does if you're going to design an army. And that is, what level of war? That's a big question. What level of war are you going to design an army to operate at, number 1. Number 2, describe the environment that you think the army is going to operate in. So with this document, we said tactical and operational. We're going to build an army that is maximized its tactical and operational proficiency. And we are going to build an army that is specifically designed to defeat the Soviet Union in the Central Plains of Europe with a NATO coalition. Well, actually, those are very powerful questions to ask and answer, because if you got those 2, then the third thing that a concept does is it defines the problem you're trying to solve. Staffers coming to me all day long, sir, here's an answer, here's an answer, here's an answer. I'm like, define the problem. I can't tell you if that's a good answer until you tell me the problem it's solving. Big challenge sometimes. Sometimes even in this city. People run around with answers, but you can't necessarily link it to a problem. If it's an answer they want to sell you, but they can't quite describe the problem. So my staff is driven crazy by me daily that say, before you come up with any answers, let's agree on the problem. But that's what a concept does. That's why the intellectual process is so powerful, because it says, define the problem before you build an army, because the army is the solution. I better have a problem it's trying to solve, because armies are expensive. I already told you, it costs you, the taxpayers, between 150 and 250 billion dollars a year for me to do what I do. So we want to make sure that you're buying an army to do something useful. Well, that was the problem they put in the manual that it's going to solve. Fight outnumbered and win. But see, it was very easy for them to define the problem, because they said, well, I know what level of war I'm fighting at, tactical operational level. I know who the enemy is. I know where it is. And I know the coalition I'm going to be using. Therefore, I do the math and I'm outnumbered. That's a problem. Fight outnumbered and win. But now it's very powerful to design an army after that, because now you can say, you know what? Fight outnumbered and win. That means that I've got to somehow, we used to use terms like battlefield geometry, battlefield calculus. Why? Because we saw war as a math problem, because it was all about numbers. Because at the tactical and operational level, war does become a math problem, okay? And therefore, we said the problem is we do the calculus and we come out on the wrong side of the answer because we are outnumbered. And because it's with a known enemy, we know them very well. We know their echelonment of command. We know how they're going to array themselves against us. And so Lieutenant Perkins, sitting there in Western Germany with his 5 tanks, he said, look, you stay here, echelon 1, echelon 2, and pretty soon the numbers aren't working in our favor. So he said, you know what would be useful is he's got a tank, an M60 tank. This pretty much has to be stationary to fire. What if I had a tank that is very fast and could shoot on the move? And then I could change the battlefield geometry such that he could maneuver on the enemy. He doesn't have to sit there and wait for them to come. He can go to them and change the battlefield geometry. And if you change the geometry, then you change the calculus. And then if you can say, you know what, and since there's going to be more enemy tanks than he has, his tank has to be able to basically absorb multiple enemy bullets and still survive, because more bullets are going to get shot at him than he can return. And since he's going to be able to return fewer bullets in a shot at him, each one of his really has to count. So maybe his tank has to have a ballistic computer slave to a laser rangefinder. So maybe to fight outnumbered and win, to solve that problem, to fight with the NATO coalition against the Soviet Union and the Central Plains of Europe at the tactical and operational level, he needs a tank that's very fast, heavily armored, and is very accurate. Sounds like an M1 tank, okay? No accident that that's how the tank is designed, because the tank is designed to solve this problem. So see, it's very important to go through this intellectual process before you build an army. Otherwise, you don't know what you're building it for. And if you say another way to solve this problem and fight outnumbered and win, what if I could engage uncommitted echelons? There's going to be echelons of Soviets coming at me, and if I wait till they're right in front of me, they're going to be stacking up. But what if I could engage them before they commit them? So that when they commit them, there are less numbers of them that I have to engage. So maybe if I buy a helicopter that can fly deep and track and engage multiple targets at once, it will help attrit them before I come here. So that's what the Apache helicopter is designed to do. It can engage, it can track and engage 16 separate targets. Why? Because it was designed to fight outnumbered and win. And then maybe I need an infantry fighting vehicle that can keep up with a very fast tank, etc. like that, hence a Bradley vehicle. And I can think of 5 big things. So we had the 5 big things that we built during the 70s and 80s to solve this problem against that enemy in that part of the world at that echelon of war. So it's no accident that our army, in many ways, looks like it looks today, the equipment that we have. And then you say, I have to fight outnumbered and win, so I have to fight combined arms. So now I have to have aviation and tanks and helicopters and infantry all at the same time because I'm outnumbered. So now I need a training center where I can array this all together. So we go out and build a national training center, Fort Ord in the middle of the desert. Why? Not because everyone loves going to the desert, because I need wide open spaces that I can array all of these things that I'm buying so I can train with them to fight outnumbered and win. So see, it becomes a very powerful driver of change if you get this concept right. Okay, we started writing this in 1974, Airland Battle. I rode the Airland Battle into Baghdad in 2001. Okay, and we will have the M1 tank for another 20 years. So this concept that was started being written in 1974 is going to end up being with us for about 50 plus years. It drove what the Army looked like, what kind of equipment we bought, how we trained, what kind of coalitions we built, because of this initial idea. That's why I always tell folks, the Army is a very large bureaucracy. It has all kinds of processes, and folks are coming to me, hey sir, you need to own this meeting. You need to be in charge of this meeting. You need to run this video teleconference. You need to run this general officer steering committee. I said, you know what? I said, I don't want to own the process. I want to own the ideas. And the ideas will drive the process. A lot of people think to drive the process, you need to own it and run the meeting. I said, yeah, I'd be consumed every day with that. My goal is to drive the process through owning the idea, not owning the meeting. So that's what an operating concept does. It owns the idea to drive the process much longer than I can chair meetings. We're going on 40 years now, okay, because of the power of the idea. So that's why this is so important for us as an Army, because this is how we build our Army. So we wrote a new Army operating concept, and we published it a couple of weeks ago at the AUSA conference. And if you could put it up. It's a bill, should be right to the right. Okay. Unified land operations is our concept. Win in a complex world. Now, a couple of things should jump out at you. If there are any formal former naval officers in the crowd. You'll notice the picture on the right is colored. The one on the left is black and white. I say that being a proud graduate of the United States Navy War College as well. That is more than a slick marketing ploy. It is a slick marketing ploy, but there's more to it than that. Because it denotes some distinct differences, although the intellectual process we went through was exactly the same, because again, life is all about metrics. So I said, I'm not going to change the process that has built and driven the Army for 50 years and given you, the American people, the most powerful land army the world has ever known. So the first thing we have to do is describe the future. Well, so we have our problem statement there, win in a complex world. What we're saying, the future I'm describing as complex. Then I define complex, if you read it. Complex means a world that is unknown, unknowable, and constantly changing. Unknown, unknowable, that's important, and constantly changing. I said it's similar to the Heisenberg principle. You know, the fact of measuring something in and of itself changes it. I think that's the same thing with the future. The fact of knowing something about the future, the fact that you know something about it, pretty much changes it and makes sure that's not going to happen. Why? Because we're the United States, we're the Army, we're 8 kind of people. If we know something about it, we're going to do something about it. And if we do something about it, that probably is not going to happen. We knew a lot about the Soviet Union. So what did we do? We wrote Airland in Battle. We built the Big Five. We did all that. Did we ever fight on the Central Plains of Europe? So actually, the future that we tried to predict never came to. So it kind of reinforces my point that the future actually is unknown and unknowable, and it constantly changes. So I told you Airland Battle was written to deal with the known. The future that we are writing this for is to deal exquisitely with the unknown. Now people say, well, Dave, that's just a cop-out. You're just lazy. You can't figure it out. I said, no, it's very important to come to grips with that you're dealing with the unknown. You know why? You buy different kind of weapons. You train people differently. You build different kind of organizations. You do things very, very differently if you have come to grips with the fact that you are constantly going to be working in an unknown world that constantly changes. Versus if you think you can predict the future, because if you think you can know the future, what you spend all your time is in grasp of finer and finer details of information of what you think you know are going to happen. Versus if you come to grips with the fact that you don't know the future and cannot know the future, you develop a capability to adapt and innovate constantly. So it's not just a cop-out to come to grips with the fact that the future is unknown. It is a very critical intellectual concept to actually nail down, because now you build a different army. And I'll talk to you about it. Not only do you build it, but you acquire it and maintain it. Kind of everything trade-off does. You design it differently, you acquire it differently, and you maintain it differently than an army that is built to deal with the known. So that's the first question we said. Complex world, unknown. This question comes up a lot since I'm supposed to be the future guy of the Army. I go to forums and everything, and people say, hey, future guy, tell me the future. Predict the future, and I get that. I was at a forum recently with a very distinguished Air Force general officer, a very distinguished Navy admiral, and I was the token land guy. And they said, hey, we want to talk about what your service is doing in the future. And what they were really saying is predict the future. Predict the future, and what are you going to do? So they talked to the Air Force gentleman. And again, by the way, none of this works from an Army point of view unless the United States Air Force always maintains air supremacy wherever they are. Wherever I am on the ground, I want to have air supremacy around me. Okay? This does not work unless the United States Navy is uncontested anywhere in the world and maintains naval supremacy everywhere it can. This concept will not work for the Army unless the United States Marine Corps are the very best naval infantrymen in the world and are uncontested. So this is not a power grab, this is not a land grab. This is saying we are part of a joint force, and the Army part doesn't work unless the Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard are without peer in the world. So I'm saying, you guys do your part. You've got to be the best of what you are. I don't want to take anything away from you, and then I'll be part of the joint force as well. So we had this joint panel, and again, we're talking about the future, and again, what they really say is predict the future. And so the Air Force general says, and the Air Force has great technology, and we're going to have this, and unmanned this, and space this, and stealth that, and all these kind of things, very impressive. They get the Navy Admiral again. First of all, he has a very impressive white uniform with gold everywhere, so it's just very imposing as it is. And we're going to have littoral this, and stealth ships, and underwater this, and unmanned this, and everything. And again, very impressive. And they obviously were masters of their domain, which I was very happy. It was very reassuring to hear that the Air Force and Navy had a vision. And then it got to me, and in a previous life, I had sort of done the spokesperson kind of thing, so I've had media training and all that. And what they always say, you know, a safety valve always, if you get asked a hard question you don't want to answer, you just answer it with another question. You've probably seen that here in this city from time to time. So they get asked, okay, land guy, tell me the future, and what's the Army do about kind of predict the future. And they say, we want you to go 50 years from now. I know it's kind of hard for you Army guys. You kind of think max effective range of a bayonet, et cetera. I want you to push out 50 years. So I kind of sit there, I said, I would categorize this as a hard question. So go back to, you know, fight as you train. Okay, you know, return it with a question. I said, you know, is this really the best question to ask? I said, but let's think about that now, because you're asking me to predict the future. I said, what if I was here 50 years, because as you see this whole thing, I'm adverse to predicting the future. I said, what if I was here 50 years ago? What if I was here 50 years ago, and you asked me, basically, Army guy, that's how I'm referred to officially usually, predict the future. I said, so let me tell you how I would answer that. So if I was here 50 years ago, and you asked me to predict the future, I would say, okay, now remember, 50 years ago, the World Trade Center wasn't even built. Wasn't even built. I said, what's going to happen, I don't know, 10 or 20 years from now, is we're going to build 2 really tall buildings on the southern tip of Manhattan. And those buildings will become the center of the world financial activity. They probably would have said, well, wait a minute, why is this guy talking about 2 buildings in Manhattan? What is he, like a Corps of Engineer guy or something? But let him go on. So I said, well, so we're going to build these really 2 tall buildings. They don't exist yet, but we're going to build them on the southern tip of Manhattan. And then, like, I don't know, 20 years after that, the United States is going to undergo an attack on the continental United States, an attack of which the consequence will be more loss of life than at Pearl Harbor. And one of the results of this attack will not only be more people killed in Pearl Harbor, but those 2 really tall buildings that don't exist yet, that I told you we're going to build, they're going to come crumbling down. I'm sure they would say, what is this guy's infatuation with these 2 tall buildings? We build them, they come down, whatever. And I could see probably the first question will be, so Army guy, what you're saying is the continental United States, you're saying like 30 years from now? This is what have probably been, you know, height of the Cold War, Vietnam probably at that point. Somebody's going to attack the continental United States and cause more casualties than Pearl Harbor. Like 30 years from now, they're probably saying, like, well, what weapon is the enemy armed with? Is it like, you know, directed energy beams, neutron bombs? You know, what was the assailants that attacked the United States, what were the assailants armed with? I'm going to say, well, box cutters. Box cutters? Army guy, that's the best you can do. 30 years from now, the weapon of choice of our adversaries is going to be box cutters? I said, yeah, that's it. You know, they're not even going to be the newest version either. They're non-stealth. They would say, well, I'm sure there was some kind of global command and control network, space-based, you know, probably a submersed part of it in the ocean that was probably vectoring in these tens of thousands, maybe millions of box-cutting wielding assailants to cause mayhem, thousands of Americans dead. I can't imagine how many people with box cutters that takes. And there's going to be a huge way to command and control them and all that, you know, to get them to the United States. So what was the command and control mechanism, this global command and control mechanism? I said, well, it'll be a radicalized guy in a cave in Afghanistan. They'll say, a radicalized guy in a cave in Afghanistan gets some folks with box cutters to cause more deaths than Pearl Harbor? That's your vision of the future? That's the best you can do? I said, yeah. And they say, okay, smart Army guy, what is the United States of America going to do about a radicalized guy in a cave in Afghanistan that was able to vector in all these box-cutting, wielding assailants. I'm like, so what are we going to do about this guy in the cave of Afghanistan? I said, it's obvious we're going to invade Iraq. I'm sure at that point in time, they would have said, like, who invited this guy? He obviously has hit happy hour way too soon. But I use that as an illustrative example of these people that try to get me to predict the future to a level of accuracy that is impossible. In fact, not only is it impossible, it's actually quite dangerous. Because when you get so assured you know what's going to happen, what happens is you will suboptimize your national security apparatus to deal with the problem that probably is not going to happen. And what's going to happen? Something you didn't think about, something you didn't plan on. Because why? You heard it here first. The future is unknown, it's unknowable, and it's constantly changing because it's complex. Okay? The other part of complex I use, I compare complexity is different than complicated. Okay? If a system is complicated, it has a lot of moving parts and it is very complicated. The analogy I use is like a Swiss watch. A Swiss watch is very complicated. So you pry open the back of a Swiss watch and you look into it and say, this is very complicated. There's gears, there's springs, there's levers, there's all kinds of stuff. Very complicated. But if something is merely complicated, you can't figure it out. If you have enough time, you can figure it out. If you study a Swiss watch long enough, you will figure out how it works. You're like, okay, I see when this gear turns, this happens, this spring, etc. like that. And not only can you figure it out, but the output of a complicated system is generally predictable and replicable. In other words, every time I wind a Swiss watch and the second hand completes one full sweep, the minute hand moves one click because it's replicable and duplicable. It's complicated, but generally the output is replicable and duplicable. If you have a complex system, you cannot figure it out. Why? Because it's constantly changing. So you open up the back of a complex watch, and complexity is, it makes no sense how those gears and springs move. And not only did it not make no sense, is you watched it, and one time the second hand went around and it clicked once. The second time that second hand went around, it moved 20 times. So even with the same input, you got a different output. That's a complex problem. When you deal with complicated problems, what you do is you generally come up with mathematical-like solutions to them because you can figure them out. An automobile is very complicated, but engineers have figured them out. And every time a Chevy Impala runs off the assembly line, it's very complicated, but its result is almost always predictable. You put gas in it, step on the gas, and generally it always goes forward. Or at least what the ads say, right? But they guarantee it for 100,000. They guarantee for 100,000 miles, it's completely replicable. It's completely predictable, right? Or else they wouldn't guarantee it. Complex systems, you can't guarantee anything. You have no idea what the output is going to be, and in fact, it's constantly changing. The only thing you can guarantee is that you have no idea what the output is. So, complex world is a very important thing to come to grips with. Then, you see, I say put win in a complex world. Well, I get a lot of pushback on that term. Well, Dave, you can't put win. That's not up to the Army to decide. It's definitely not up to the trade-off commander to decide. I'm like, oh, really? I thought it was. I thought it was my job. Now, who defines win? They said, that's our political leaders. That's if we have a coalition partners. That's a joint thing. It's a lot of people play in that. I said, oh, so it's kind of like a strategic thing. Right, exactly. You win at the strategic level. Well, so we put the word win in there because what we're saying is we're going to design an army to operate at the tactical, operational, and strategic level. So it's the first time our Army has said we are going to build an army to operate at all three levels of war. And it's the first time we've said that we're going to build an army to deal exquisitely with the unknown. Our first field manual in the Army was written in 1904. And from then on, our doctrine was always written to deal with the known. This is the first time we said we are going to write a concept exquisitely focused on the unknown and the unknowable at the tactical, operational, strategic level of war. And therefore, the problem is, how do I win in a complex world? Now, there's a couple of things you need to know about that. So, as outlined in Field Manual 100-5, find out number to win, that was written in there as defining the problem. And so I told our guys before we had kind of finalized what we had, I said, we need to define the problem, because I'm telling you guys, you're my staff guys, never give me an answer until you've defined the problem, so we need to define the problem. So they would come into me day after day with very Army-like products that they were very large and voluminous and sometimes overwritten. Slides and slides and slides. So the problem is, it's non-nation state actors with nation state capability, hybrid threats, transnational this, cross-border that, peer competitors, regional competitors. It would be page after page. It was very accurate. I always tell my folks, never lose clarity in the search for accuracy. When you're asking big questions, you need to focus on clarity. Okay, the accuracy will come later, and clarity informed by accuracy. But they would bring me very accurate descriptions. So it was pages and pages and pages. I said, no, you've got to provide clarity, reduce it. So we went from 3 pages to 2 pages. I said, okay, this guidance is not working here. Now, I've learned, having run a number of large organizations, that if you are in charge of the organization, you've got to come up with forcing functions. You may want 10,000 things to happen, but you cannot go around every day checking on all 10,000. You've got to pick 1 or 2 things that if you drive that home, it's a forcing function, it's going to force the other 10,000. So after about a week of great staff officers, big, long problem definitions, etc. like that, I said, okay, time for the forcing function to come out. So I said, give me that version 100-5. So I said, okay, they define the problem here as find out number to win. Find out number to win. Find out number, 6 syllables. I said, you have 6 syllables. You have 6 syllables to define the problem that the United States Army, the most powerful land force the world has ever known, what we're going to design it to do in the next 50 years. You have 6 syllables. Of course, they're like, no wonder this guy's a brand new 4-star general. And they're thinking like, this guy's a 4-star general, and the only guidance he can give me how to design the most powerful land force for the next 50 years of the world is you have 6 syllables. Come back to me when you're done. I said, that's it, 6 syllables. Can we have 7? No. 5 would be even better, because I need clarity. Win in a complex world, 6 syllables, okay? That's exactly how we got, that was the forcing function. Now, so when you only have 6 syllables, you've got to use each one of them very, very well. And each one of those words has to have meaning. So I already defined what complexity meant, okay? That's a pretty encompassing idea there, okay, about complexity. And then the win aspect of it is, by putting the word win in there, it focuses on the strategic level, which means this has to be nested with the Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, State Department, USID, Department of Treasury, coalition partners, host nation folks, if you're operating there. You've got to bring them all together. In fact, if you look on the thing there, UNHCR, do you think the 101st Airborne Division that's in West Africa fighting Ebola is working with the World Health Organization, other United Nations folks? Yeah, those are all strategic assets. This Lieutenant Perkins, he only had to deal with NATO folks on the Central Plains of Europe. That's all we wanted Perkins to do. I know another Lieutenant Perkins who may have to go to Africa, may have to go to Afghanistan, may have to go to Estonia, and may have to fight Ebola, may have to fight the Taliban, may have to fight who knows what, adventurism in the Ukraine, whatever. I can't tell him what he's going to have to do. Why? Because it's complex. I already told you. It's unknown, unknowable, and constantly changing. In fact, you may have to do all of them in one tour. Very different world than this Lieutenant Perkins grew up. Why? Because I grew up with Doctrine dealing with the known. When we talk about win, not only does it mean at the strategic level of war, but since I only gave him 6 syllables, not only does every word have to have a lot of meaning behind it, but the order is important. If you look at airline battle, fight, outnumbered, and win, what was the implied sequence of events? To win, you had to fight. To win, you had to fight. So when you built that army, all the focus was on how do you fight? What if we put all the focus on here? Winning. The focus with the new Army operating concept is winning. Now, you may actually be able to win without fighting. Okay, but, especially in this town, I have to do the but, stay at my feet on the ground, but there's a big implied piece that goes with that. Because the problem is, if I just walk away and say, you might be able to win without fighting, there may be people in this town that says, hey, that's the army I want to buy. I want an army that can win without fighting. I mean, it sounds a lot cheaper to me. How great can that be? We'll just win all the time and not fight. That's the army we want. That's the structure I want, etc. like that. I said, be careful what you ask for, you might get it. Be careful what you ask for, you might get it. Because if you want to even have a chance to win without fighting, it must be absolutely clear in everybody's mind, especially the enemy, that if it does come down to a fight, you are going to win. There can be no misunderstanding about that, which means that's a very capable army, that just a mention of your name, people tremble in the boots and say, I'm not picking a fight with that army because I know they're going to win. Then you may have a chance with winning without fighting. But if there's doubt whether or not you're going to win, somebody might pick a fight with you. So it's almost counterintuitive to say that's a cheaper army to build. A cheap army is one that can only win by fighting. That's a less capable army. The most capable army is the army that can win without fighting, because now it has huge deterrence capability. Like I say, if I walked into a bar in Pittsburgh and I saw a defensive lineman from the Pittsburgh Steelers at the bar, even though I really don't like the Pittsburgh Steelers, sorry to anyone from Pittsburgh, I probably not just going to walk up to him and just punch him in the face and say, we'll take that. Why? Because I know how that fight is going to come out. I know that he's going to win that, okay? Because he's a defensive lineman, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I walk in, the outcome of that fight is already predetermined. So guess what? He just won that bar fight, okay? Because I just went over here and ordered a Coors Light. So he won that fight because he won without fighting. So when people say, hey, I heard Perkins say you can win without fighting, I want that army. I'm like, break out the checkbook. Because now you've set a very high bar. Because what I'm saying is, you're saying you want an army that can win all the time at the tactical, operational, and strategic level in an unknown world that constantly changes. Well, that's the army that we've decided that we're going to build for our nation. And so that is sort of the task that we put on our plate. This is 2 weeks old, and we just rolled it out. But it is completely different than any other way we've ever looked at the United States Army. We are building an army that can operate and win primarily at the strategic level by being uncontested at the tactical and operational level. And we're going to build an army that can operate in the unknown, the unknowable, and constantly changing. And therefore, we have to acquire people, acquire material, train them, build material that excel in a very complex world at the strategic level. So what I'd like to do now is open it up to questions that any of you might have on this.
I'm helping because we're short on time. I'm helping because we are short on time. One question of 6 syllables, an answer of 12. One question, and then I will select a question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Stephanie Shen representing... Oh, here you go. Hi, Stephanie Shen representing the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. As a former military service member myself, serving for the Judge Advocate General of the U.S. Army, I've heard over and over again that the future of warfare in the 21st century is indeed not on the ground but in the air. I would like to know, how has the Army, thus, if this is true, adapted to the aviation arena we find ourselves in, especially with concerns to unmanned armed vehicles and drones?
Yeah. Great question. Well, so I'm not here to pit like the Navy against the Army, against the Air Force. Let me just tell you sort of how things work from a strategic point of view, because I said the Army, we've now just jumped into the strategic thing. So I'll address the air, I'll actually address all the domains. So we have multiple domains that we fight in, and they're all outlined in here. We have the land domain, we have the maritime domain that our Navy is dominated in, we have the air domain that our Air Force, we have the cyber domain that we all operate in, and we have the space domain. So you have all of those domains, and they all have levels of technology that play in them. But in the end, why do we conduct war? Why do we conduct war? Well, what we're saying, first of all, to win. Okay, and since I'm from TRADOC and sort of the intellectual side of the Army, I have to quote Clausewitz or Sun Tzu, or both of them, or one of them. So what did Clausewitz say war is? War is an extension of politics by other means. Okay, so that's why we get into war, not just to battle technology, to sue kind of, the rock'em sock'em technology robots. what we do is an extension of politics by other means. What we are trying to do is compel our enemy's activity, possibly without their consent. Compel activity without their consent. That's why you wage war, to compel activity without consent. Now, you have multiple domains that you do that in. And I don't mean to be overly parochial here, but I will be adequately parochial. I am the land guy. What you do in the other domains is you tend to convince people to do things. Okay, you try to convince them. What you do on land is you compel them without their consent, if possible. So what happens with our great technology from the air and the sea is, what do we usually do there? Is we target people. That's what you do in the air and the sea and the domains, even cyberspace, is you target them. Okay? You acquire them and target them. But actually, that's what you do when you fight outnumbered and win, because it's a math game. You're trying to acquire targets and target them. And that's a tactical and operational effect. You are trying to get a tactical or operational effect via targeting. What the land component does is it tends to make permanent what would otherwise be a temporary effect of a targeting activity. Okay? And so I tell people, do not put land forces involved unless you care about the outcome of the targeting event. Because if you target somebody, you can target them, but then what do they do after you target them? Unless you're there on the ground, who knows? You cannot compel their activity. So our good friend Saddam Hussein, after Desert Storm, we targeted him a lot in Desert Storm. And then after that, we had no-fly zones. And we would have the Saddam exit, sort of like that. And then we started off OIF-1 with shock and awe and all that. We targeted. Did he relinquish power? No, because even if you're targeting them, for them to give up power, they have to consent. Generally, if from the other domains you are targeting, and for them to change their activity in the other domains, they have to consent. They have to decide themselves that I am going to succumb myself to your will. Saddam Hussein did not actually give up power or say it's over until the 4th Infantry Division soldiers pulled his butt out of a hole in the ground. And they said, on behalf of the United States of America, you are giving up. Even if he didn't consent to, what could those soldiers do? Compel his activity. It is almost impossible, and without historical precedence, that you can compel activity from any other domain unless you have the consent of the person you're targeting. The only way you can actually compel your will on somebody is on the ground. Because we talk about standoff capability, and I love standoff capability, and I've used it my entire career. We're going to stand off over the horizon, target. Sometimes it takes stand-on capability. Standoff capability tries to convince people. Standoff capability compels you without your consent. That's the big difference between land and any of the others. It doesn't make it more important or less important, but do not fall into the trap that war is about targeting. Convincing is about targeting, but war is about compelling.
I offered the last question to the ladies from Ursuline Academy of Dallas, who have more decoration on their lapels than even a 4-star general. One quick question, please.
Hi. Earlier in the conference, we were talking about education and the role in the future of America for it. And we were wondering, what skills or subjects do you think will and the military need in our education to help fight in this new complex world?
That's a great question. So you take a look on the left, we focused a lot on material. M1 tanks, Apache helicopters, worked with the Air Force, A-10s, et cetera, like that, airland battle, because the goal was to target a known enemy. On the right, what we're saying is the #1 asymmetric capability we have are soldiers, leadership. Leadership makes all the difference in the world. Because what we're finding is with technology is our most easily transferable capability. Because almost everything the US military has, almost anyone else can have it if they want to buy it, either on the open market or black market. You can generally get it if you buy it. What you can't buy is leadership, discipline, the culture, ethos, all of those things, and that is what makes all the difference in the world. So General Odierno rightly said our #1 priority of the United States Army to operate in a complex world is leader development, our professional military education and training. And therefore, we have to have people that not can only execute scripts, but are great critical thinkers. Can seize, retain, and exploit the initiative. Our doctrine says we seize, retain, and exploit the initiative. We don't control subordinates, we empower subordinates, because you don't control exploitation of the initiative, you empower exploitation of the initiative. So that's our number one thing. So right now, if you go to basic training down in Fort Jackson, the moment they get off that Bluebird bus to meet their drill sergeant, we're starting not only to work on compliance with basic military skills, but we develop critical thinking skills. Critical thinking is not just an elective at the War College. It happens the moment they show up at basic training, because we say that imperative to deal with an unknown, unknowable, and constant changing world. So it's all about our leader development. That's it. That will make or break it.
General Perkins, if I may. I would say that's not bad for an Army guy. Thank you very much.
For a land
Thank
guy,
you.
huh?
For a land guy. For a land guy. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And I appreciate all your time, and I appreciate your sincere interest in the security of the United States, and for that part, the world, because security of the world is based on the security of the United States. So thanks a lot. Godspeed.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.